This is May the 6th, 2022, and we are interviewing Doug Ohm for the Nebraska Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Morning, Doug.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Let's get started. So we started to talk. You were born and raised here?
I grew up in Elkhorn, Nebraska, and back when it was only 650 people and everybody knew everybody.
It's changed some.
Yeah, about 10,000 people, maybe 12. It's growing leaps and bounds out there.
Okay. And then, where did you go to high school?
I went to Elkhorn High School. I was in a class of 38 kids, and it was just a wonderful small town atmosphere, you know, church and Boy Scouts and 4-H clubs and going occasionally with mom and dad different places.
Okay, do you have siblings?
I do. I have two sisters. My oldest sister is born in 44, and my younger sister in 58, and I was born right in between 1949.
Okay, all right. And so how did you end up in the military?
Well, I graduated from high school, and I attended Midland Lutheran College, and it was a Lutheran college at the time, but now it's Midland University in Fremont, Nebraska. And I was a business administration major, a lot of emphasis on sales and marketing. And I also went on a basketball scholarship for 4 years. And so, you know, athletics was always important to me. I grew up in the church, singing in choirs, active in all music. When I was growing up in high school, you know, chorus and quartet and octet and everything. And I was the #1 drummer in the band. And I was also a high school quarterback, and I played the first half and then got my drum and marched in the band, and then went to the bus and got yelled at by the coach and went out and played the whole second half. And I also played in a rock band. I played keyboards, and that was my junior and senior year in high school. And so us kids were always, you know, everything was well-roundedness. I mean, you know, really nice balance in life, and I had a good childhood. And my dad owned businesses. He had a propane gas business, and he sold that in '62. Bought the Purina feed mill, and I worked there when I was in junior high, and learned to wait on customers and definitely throw bags of seed and unload box cars. And in my spare time, all around Elkhorn now is suburbs, but at the time, everybody and their farm hired kids to bale hay, walk beans, scoop corn. And it seemed like I was always working, you know, since 6th grade.
So that was your substitute for the weight room.
Yeah, baling hay. And I was always okay if the farmer didn't put me in the barn, because hay fever, there wasn't a lot to take back in those days except contact. And that dried you out. But they always kept me on the rack out in the open air, and I could throw bales all day long.
Sounds like fun. So what happened at Midland College?
Well, at Midland,
Midland
I graduated from Midland in 1971, and I remember the day the guys came back to the dorm room, and they had just done the lottery. And I remember waking up and then saying, "Oh man, poor Doug, number 34." And so from that point on, I tried to wade through the details of knowing that I had to do something. And so I enlisted in a Navy cachet program. That's a 6 months delay before you go active duty. And in the meantime, I took the test for officer candidate school. And as a business major, it is quite difficult to pass all the science and math in that test, but I did it and passed the physical. And they said, "Sorry." Well, by the middle of the summer, I didn't know what was going on, and then I got the letter saying, "We don't have room for you in officer candidate school." And so I was forced to go enlisted. And I went active duty November 30th, 1971. And that was my first airplane flight from Omaha to Chicago. And I was in boot camp over the winter at Great Lakes. And I was in the barracks, the farthest walk to the galley. So back and forth about 6 blocks in that wind and snow, and it was a cold winter, and then got out of boot camp. And well, I went into the Navy as an E3. They had a program, if you have your college degree, you'll go in as an E3 instead of an E1. And that's the elastic ranks going up. And so I went in as an E3 and took the aptitude, and they said you'd be a good personnelman, and that's the paper pusher taking care of servicemen's records. And I went to San Diego for 2 months, A school, and learned my trade over that 8 to 10 weeks in A school, and then was assigned my first duty station. And out of something like 36 students in A school personnelman class out in San Diego, 8 of us were married, and all 8 got sea duty.
So when
instead
did
of
you
shore
get,
duty.
When did you get married in this?
I got married during my senior year in college.
Okay.
And so, you know, it was quite a deal, you know, leaving for boot camp. But I was assigned personnelman duties at HS2. That's Helicopter Anti-Submarine Squadron 2 out of San Diego, Imperial Beach, Naval Air Station Imperial Beach, and that's right north of Tijuana.
Mm.
And San Ysidro is the last U.S. town going in to Tijuana from the south. And then Imperial Beach, then Chula Vista, National City, and San Diego. And then up the coast from there, La Jolla.
Did your wife get to go to California with you?
She did. My wife at the time made the trip, and she got a job out there. We got an apartment in Imperial Beach, and then she went to work for a lumber company, and she used to work in Millard at Millard Lumber when she was in high school. And I met her in college, and so actually, with it being sea duty, we were, as a squadron, helicopter squadron, and you'll know exactly what helicopters they are because you remember the astronaut capsules. being picked up by the big white helos, and the guys coming down. That was HS squadrons, either 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 or 10 on the West Coast, and the odd numbers were in Pensacola,
Interesting.
Florida, and that's how they did all the helicopter squadrons. And we were part of Air Wing 14 out of Miramar, California, and Air Wing 14, which is attached to the U.S.S. Enterprise. And so when the Enterprise went to sea, the Air Wing went to sea, or part of the Air Wing went to sea. And since I was married, my good friend Gene from Amarillo, Texas, was single, and he volunteered to go on the 72 and 73 cruise, and those cruises last about 9 months long. And then the next cruise, the whole squadron went on, and it left September 4th, 1975, or no, 74, and then went to Hawaii, and then about a day and a half supplying the ship in Hawaii. Then we left Pearl Harbor and went over to the Philippines, Tonkin Gulf area. And we were in and out of the Philippines as our home base, close to Subic Bay, about every 3 weeks. The longest we were out at sea was over Thanksgiving and Christmas. And I remember we pulled into the Philippines on Christmas Eve, and that was my duty day, so I had to stay aboard ship and sort about 250 pounds of mail. And so that's how I spent my Christmas at 74. And my mom and dad, of course, were back here, and that was when we had the big blizzard of 75. And I remember being on board Enterprise. Our little helicopter admin office was on the port side of the ship. That's the left side, right under the number 3 arresting cable, one, deck under. And so the number 3 arresting cable is what the hooks catch on, and noise constantly, and I slept right across, right under the number 3 on the same one deck under. That was my berthing area.
Okay.
So I was constantly hearing planes take off, but I remember our office was the only non-air conditioned office. And we left Hawaii in September, or about right before October 1st, and it was over 80 degrees, and it never got below 80 degrees for 9 months until it cooled off when we were on our way back in May of 1975. And I remember sitting in sweat dripping off and looking at the newspaper clippings of all the drifts in Nebraska. It's kind of ironic,
Did they help you cool off looking at all that snow?
I suppose it did. And so we were, usually patrolling the Tonkin Gulf, and those helicopter squadrons, they had to fly plane guard support whenever aircraft was in the air. So if they were running sorties and operations, and all the different squadrons, the VF squadrons the newest ship at the time was F-14 Tomcats, and that's the type Tom Cruise in Top Gun flew F-14 Tomcats, and they were new, and they had a little bug in the engine, and we did lose 2 of them due to engine failure, and then the pilots got out safely, and we picked them up out of the drink.
That's good.
And that was our job, you know. And then we were going to go on, well, through that cruise, I remember I really enjoyed Hong Kong. And Hong Kong had a real good exchange rate with the dollar, U.S. dollar. And of course, back then, it was under British rule. And sitting there, you know, having a beer in a bar in Hong Kong with guys, and you knew that in 1997, way out in the future, that Hong Kong was going to revert back to communist China. And you know, you just didn't fathom the time frame. I mean, the years go by so fast once you're out of the service. So Hong Kong, and we were in Singapore, and I remember going through the Straits of Malacca and looking and down, you know, the Enterprise wasn't a ship for people that feared heights. And you look down over and you imagine falling in that water, and that water was full of sea snakes. And it was crystal clear glass, you know, and you just imagine, oh God, if I fell overboard, you know. So that got us through the Straits of Malacca by Indonesia and then up to Singapore. And Singapore is a little more commercialized and actually not as enjoyable as Hong Kong. But we didn't have a whole lot of time to see there. Then we went into the Indian Ocean and up around Saudi Arabia and then down to the little island of Mauritius, which is out there by Madagascar. And Mauritius had been hit by a hurricane. And of course, there was a political competition of, oh, who's going to look good getting there first and helping Mauritius put their island back together. So we were there about 3 or 4 days, and that's down by the equator, and we crossed the equator. So I became a shellback and had to go through that initiation of 1 day. They take the guys that hadn't been across the equator and put them through an initiation, probably a whole lot tougher than a college fraternity initiation. And so that was quite an experience. And then we stopped 4 days in Mombasa, Kenya. And that was interesting. I had duty in between, so I was kind of city bound. Mombasa wasn't really a city. It was like a village with British influence, and vendors came up, you know, and you sat all day on a hotel veranda drinking warm beer. And then the vendors tried to sell you little carved rhinos and souvenirs, and that was quite an experience. But Mombasa had the whitest sand beaches. It was just beautiful. And then we made it back, and we were going to about April 25th, we were going to drop anchor in Manila. And it was kind of touch and go where you could go with a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier back in those days. You couldn't go to Japan, you couldn't go to Australia. They didn't allow it. And so we went to Manila, dropped anchor. We all had our civilian clothes on for 1 day of liberty. And then all of a sudden, general quarters, whoop, whoop, whoop. And then up anchor, they wouldn't tell us where we were going, why Liberty was canceled. But then we heard through the grapevine that they were going to have the evacuation of refugees out of Saigon. And our fighter planes were giving support to the H-46 Marine Huey helicopters to get in and out, taking refugees to a light carrier. And then if there was any problems, a lot of planes came back, shot up. And so I'm sure it was a pretty stressful period for my friends who were pilots. And that's it. In the helicopter squadron, those officers, you quickly realize that as the aviation part of the Navy, that they were pilots first. They could give a rip about being assigned personnel officer for a squadron because they didn't even worry about their duties. I did because I was delegated basically everything they did or they were supposed to do, and then I did it, and then I just said, you can read it, but I know it's right, just sign it. And they were too busy to, one quarter I got the award, letter of commendation that quarter, and I wrote my own letter of commendation, and Captain Higgins signed it and said, good job, Doug, And that was, you kind of learned that there were certain qualities about sailors from the Midwest where you could really depend on them getting the job done on time, effectively, accurately. And so you kind of became the guy from Nebraska or Iowa or South Dakota or Colorado or Kansas. Those were to me the cream of the crop guys that you could go to for anything and it'd get done. That's kind of interesting. And yet the whole time, with about a year and a half left, I quickly went from E4 in about a year and a half to E4 in a year and a half, and then in about another year and a half to E5. And if I would have re-upped or re-enlisted for 4 more years, then I could have been an E6. However, with about a year and a half left, I had just made E5, so I was supervising the Office of People, and me and Chief Petty Officer kind of ran the office. And if you take care of officer records, you're called a yeoman. A personnelman takes care of the enlisted. And when you're a run-of-the-mill sailor out there at sea or in a squadron, you always want to get along good with the hospital corpsman, because he sticks the gun in your in your arm, and if he doesn't like you, he can just pull a little and rip your skin. And then you always want to get along good with the dispersing clerk, the guy that has your pay record, because you don't want him to get mad at you and then saying, oh, your pay record went over the side of the ship. And I was the guy that, recorded your Navy history and then prepared your DD 214 and when you got out. And they always wanted to treat the personnelman good, because if there was a delay in personnel records, there was a delay for you getting out and going home. And one of my jobs in the service was counseling guys getting ready to depart the Navy, and getting all the paperwork ready. But one of my jobs was to describe a single major medical plan or a family major medical plan for 90 days underwritten by Mutual of Omaha. Now when you're over there and the natives, you know, everybody's name is Joe. Hey Joe, what ship you on? Oh, I'm on the Enterprise. Oh, Enterprise. Where are you from, Joe? Oh, I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. Oh, Boys Town. Or, oh, Mutual of Omaha Wild Kingdom. So that's what I got. And it was kind of ironic that I signed up one for myself, and then when I decided, well, I didn't know what I was going to do with my degree, and I always held this animosity of why did I have to go? Why did all my fraternity brothers have a head start 4 years on me? And they were starting at $7,000 or $8,000 or $9,000 a year, and I was still making $363 a month.
Excuse me, that water is for you if you want it.
Okay, thank you. So I was just kind of angry that I was separated from what my life was supposed to be, and the continuity of it, and then interrupted by a 4-year service. However, you know, I felt like it was my duty to serve. Now that I look back, I'm kind of angry about the politics of why we went to war. There's too much the average person didn't know of what and why and how was going on behind the scenes. And so, you know, I mean, that comes with maturity and age and education, you know, and I look at what I must have been like back then, and I was just going through the motions, and the motions were good and true in my heart, and yet I know I was dumb as a stump. And, you know, I'm glad I stuck around and kind of learned a little bit about everything. But it was kind of ironic when I took back to Nebraska my belongings and did buy a house with my dad's help on the down payment, and then I got settled in, and then the phone rang, and hey Doug, this is Tom Strand. We ran around together at track meets, and I was from Hooper and you're from Elkhorn, and we haven't talked for a long time, but I'm an agent at Mutual of Omaha, and I have your policy. What policy? Oh, the policy I took out, 90-day major medical. And back in those days, you had to wait 90 days after you first were employed before your group insurance was effective. And so we got together, and he said, well, what are you doing now? I said, well, I've thought about it for 4 years. In fact, I took a life insurance self-study course with Lutheran Brotherhood, and I took that with me on the 9-month cruise. And I finished it. And I was kind of wondering, well, maybe real estate, maybe insurance, maybe something else, but I had no connections of a college that I was gone from for 4 years, and they used to set up interviews with major corporations, you know, for guys in accounting and marketing, and so I didn't have any connections. So Tom got me an interview. Mutual of Omaha wanted me, and I wanted them. just because of the name recognition. And I felt like I could get trained adequately, and it was hometown headquarters here in Omaha. And so I started March 3rd, 1976. And I've had quite a career, 46 years. I'm still active. I do a little bit something every day for my clients. I'm a financial advisor with Securities America. And I kind of got into the investment part of the business. Back in the late 70s, we were supposed to be multi-line agents. So I got my auto and homeowner's license. I had 11 days to learn a sales track and get my life and health license. So I crash coursed. 11 days later, I was a licensed insurance agent, started a new man school with Mutual of Omaha, and there was 9 kids in the class, or young men, and they gave me the Top Man Award. And I got the Top Man Award in boot camp also. And going back to boot camp, it was quite an adjustment getting off the plane and standing there and having this guy about 5'8", E6 submarine petty officer, which was my new company commander, yelling at us. And, you know, that we just weren't used to that. And so that guy, that first night, I was thinking, well, I'm a little older than these guys. You know, I'm 22 years old, and they're probably 18 or 19. And so when he said, "Who's the meanest son of a in here?"
You can say it. It's okay.
"Who's the meanest son of a bitch in here?" I said, "Sir, I am, sir." I thought, you know, what do I got to lose? And he said, "Okay, you're my master at arms." Well, about a day later, I saw on this bulletin board tryouts for the Blue Jacket Choir. I thought, well, I still had an element of freedom to my life, or at least I thought I did. And so I signed up for it and went to the Blue Jacket Choir tryouts. And I had sung in choirs for years and been singing harmonies and rock bands and stuff, you know, and so I was accepted. And I realized that, oh, now you have to transfer from this rifle company to a Blue Jacket Choir company. And I did, and the company commander in Blue Jacket Choir was such a nice guy. And I met a lot of great guys, you know, and the special thing about making that choir was that you went to practice for 2 hours every day instead of out marching with a rifle. And then every Friday morning, a new group from boot camp graduated every 8 weeks, you know, and so you actually got to spend half a Friday seeing civilians and singing your song, you know, and Navy hymn and everything. But that was a good experience, and I still have some friends from that Blue Jacket Choir company today. But that first company commander, I told him what I did, and he was so angry, you know, just because he had to start over and pick somebody else. So, you know, I never saw him again. But that was a cold winter up in Great Lakes.
So while you did the choir, did you also do the other kind of training they would normally do in boot camp, just less intense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, or quicker.
Okay.
You know, all the guys were pretty sharp, pretty good guys, and we picked everything up real fast. But on the obstacle course, you know, here he is, a 6'4", 220 college athlete. I just thought, hey, this is easy peasy. And but they picked me for Top Man Award, and then in Mutual Omaha they did, and 2 years later, the insurance business do the same thing now as they did 40 years ago. Mud against the wall, higher, 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 mud against the wall. 2 years later, 90% are gone. And I never knew from being in the service that Mutual told me do this, this, and this, and this, and do it to your best of your ability. And so I thought, well, all I got to do is this, and I never knew there was a chance of failure. And so after 2 years, I was the only one left of 9. And I started achieving goals at a higher level, and the top 300 agents in the United States with Mutual of Omaha were members of the Chairman's Council. And I wrote that Chairman's Council until I left Mutual. But I got into investments in 1978, back when money market was earning 15 to 20%, and there's no commission in money market. But I talked to people, got their money market started, and then told them about tax deferment and other products, and learned the investment business over the next couple of years. And then in 1987, I was hired by Mass Mutual here in Nebraska to be their investment and annuity specialist for a bunch of insurance agents that wished they knew more. And it was my job to take them under the wing, and I still took care of my own clients and rode herd on those guys. And by 2001, I had 42 people statewide that I had to travel around, and I was just wearing too many hats. And then they decided to get rid of my boss. They got rid of 35 out of 93 offices of guys that were over 55. And that was evidently over the hill. We could do it cheaper, hiring some young punk that doesn't know what he's doing. And it kind of hurt the company. But I was 51 at the time, and I was getting treated more and more like I was over the hill too. And so I left Mass Mutual in 2002 and worked 2 years for Gail Werner Robertson, the daughter of Werner Trucking. And she took care of group life insurance and voluntary health insurance for Werner Corporation. And so that's what I did, and was part of her GWR brokerage. And then she sold to Securities America in 2004, and I've been an independent, financial advisor and fiduciary ever since, and like what I do. And I'm just lucky that I can be in a profession where I'm 72 years old and can still be productive.
You mentioned that you're still in touch with some of your Blue Choir friends. Do you have reunions at all?
No.
No. What about with any of your Navy buddies?
Well,
I know the Blue Choir is, or Blue Jacket, was it
yeah,
Blue Jacket?
Blue Jacket Choir.
I realized they were in Navy too, but like anybody from the Enterprise or that helicopter group?
A few I'm a member of HS2 reunion guys on Facebook.
Okay.
And
do they ever physically meet? I realize the last 2 years have made it very difficult.
The only one that I supervised was a guy named John, and he grew up in New York, but he went from California to Colorado and became a firefighter. And so his whole career was fighting fires out in the western part of the United States. And he lives in Durango, and he's probably 67 now. And and I keep in touch with him and a few others. And a guy named Brian Dunn, he's an old Navy buddy. He didn't have good enough eyesight to become an officer or a pilot. That's what he always wanted. But he got his bachelor's at Cornell and his graduate at Yale. And he's been an English professor on the East Coast. I've never seen him again, but I have seen a guy that was in the Blue Jacket Choir company with me. His name is Jeff Poole, and he lives up in Michigan. And he and I used to have so much fun. But the thing about the Blue Jacket Choir company was, you know, you'd wash clothes in buckets and scrub brush, and then it didn't make a lot of sense, but you'd hang them on the line outside in 0 weather and they never really dry. They just froze. But but in that big laundry part of the restroom had rows of sinks, and we could start a 4-part harmony song. And the sound in there just rang so beautifully, you know, and you could just listen to the other parts come in. And so we had a lot of fun singing.
Are you in any choirs now today?
No. I have been over the years, and I've sung the Hallelujah chorus, and I know that part. And back in college, I was a sophomore, and basketball had just gotten over in mid-March, and the music professor knew of my family because my older sister sang in his choirs. And so I wasn't in any formal music groups, but Mr. Nelson, and he recently passed a couple of years ago. He lived out in Oregon and was back for a reunion, and I sang in the reunion choir because that sophomore year in 1969, he came to me and he said, "Hey, my drummer in the Cleft Dwellers broke his arm." Bill Fry broke his arm. "Doug, I know you can play drums as well as keyboards, you know, in bands. Can you be our drummer for the rest of the year? We have to go on choir tour." And, you know, the Cleft Dwellers were like the song and dance group at Midland, like the Scarlet and Cream at Nebraska. And I said, yeah, I'll do it. And so the last night of the choir tour, I had heard the bass part so many times that I put on the robe and marched up with all the basses in the choir. And then he looked up and he gave me that eye and said, "Don't screw up or you're done." And so I got through that, you know, and sang bass on all the songs. Not a note of music because they sang a cappella without music. So that was kind of an experience, but, you know, a lot of good stories.
Do you feel you were well treated when you came home by people who knew you were in the military?
Totally indifferent.
Didn't care?
I didn't brag about what I did, but the only thing I was well aware of, like my dad was, back when I was a little boy, American Legion commander out in Douglas County. And he was always active with firing squads at funerals and American Legion, and he played drums too at a lot of VFW and Eagles clubs, and so I was kind of in that atmosphere of watching him get all the glory for, I mean, he's a veteran of World War II, Battle of the Bulge. And his time in the service was only about 2 years active duty. But when he got out, they just said, you can go home now. You know, when the ship docked in New York City and thousands of GIs came off, and they were about this close of being kept, you know, because they were waiting to go to Japan,
Mm-hmm.
and then Hiroshima, but you know, he had to be a hobo on the way back to Omaha, hopping boxcars. Well, I mean, the Navy flew me home, and I got off in Omaha, Nebraska, and frankly, Scarlett, no one.
No, that's fair.
So, and you didn't have any animosity that they didn't appreciate it, but you didn't know you should be appreciated because so many people hated the fact that we were in Nam anyway.
I don't know if you have children or grandchildren, nieces, nephews. Have you spoken to your family members about your military experiences during that time? Have you shared?
Little bit, you know, that I was in Kenya and Hong Kong and Singapore, and
What about the
how big
actual
the ship
military part of it?
not a whole lot about boot camp.
Or the support of the Vietnam piece? Have you spoken, or have they asked?
Well, they know that for the past few years I've been a part of the Vietnam Vets of Nebraska Chapter 279, and the Vice President, a guy named Terry Hester, is a good friend of mine, and we play in the golf league, the old guys golf league on Wednesdays, and we just played for the first time, and everybody got cold Wednesday. It was 50, but it felt like 42. So, but I try to be as active as I can. I participate. You know, I mean, I wear my hat quite a bit. You know, because I'm proud to wear it. You know, and
Do people comment?
it is greatly appreciated these days. I finally feel like a veteran. For 30 years after I got out of the service, it was immaterial, just peripheral knowledge. Nobody really made a big deal out of anything. But I'd do it again, but you know, I blame the Navy and separation and not getting enough foundation under my first marriage. My first marriage fell apart, and she stayed out in California, and I moved back to Nebraska. And we got divorced about 6 months before I got out.
That's so common.
Yeah. Well, and what I knew at age 21, and then my second marriage at age 27, I mean, there was just night and day on maturity levels. And you know, I'm proud of the Navy for giving me a foundation. You know, I'm a love mom, fly the flag, apple pie, patriotic warrior, and I'm proud to be this such.
I do have to ask this because it always fascinates me. Why the Navy from the middle of the country when the oceans are on the other side?
The lead guitar player waited to get drafted, and he spent time in the Army. A guy named Dick Harrison is one of my good clients. After the service, he ended up being a engineer with Union Pacific, train engineer all those years, and he lives up in Fremont. And before I even knew him, he was called up, and he got out in 1969. He's only a year older than me, but he did his right out of high school, and he was our equipment manager in our band in 1970 and 71. He had just come back from the service, and it wasn't until I got to know him better now later in life that he was a machine gunner on a patrol boat on the Mekong Delta. And a lot of guys like him never came home. But I mean, Dick is a pretty salty guy. But why the Navy? I don't know. I just thought, well, it's something different for 4 years. I don't have anything against the Air Force, but I remember I had two uncles that had been in the Navy, and I had a first cousin who died. A train hit his car when I was about 13 years old, and he was only about 22, fresh out of the Navy. Of course, he was a drunk, but I mean, a lot of guys had problems.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to add or to share about the military, your experiences, the impact, Vietnam?
Yeah, I remember, seeing all kinds of artillery explosions, on the coast. We were well off the coast, maybe 12, 25 miles off the coast in international waters. And we were never shot at, but I know a lot of helos, and especially aircraft aboard, were shot at. And, having a college degree, I really became pretty darn good friends with a lot of pilots, and it didn't take me too long to realize they were pilots first and extra duties second. And one pilot, Lieutenant Haig, he was formerly a tennis player at the University of Georgia, and he knew, well, I played basketball 4 years in the Navy. That was a really good experience, some of the best basketball I ever played, over and above college ball. And then I played 10 years full speed when I got back to Omaha, and kind of gave it up around age 36, 37 because I couldn't keep up with the guys out of college, 22 years old anymore. And but the guys in the Navy, you didn't know if they were going to play jungle ball out of Harlem, or I remember this all-American guard, Charlie McGoughlin, helicopter pilot. He was one of the best guards in basketball. But Walt Haig asked me, "Hey, Doug, you're really athletic, and our typical day on shore in the Philippines was I played tennis from 8 to 11, doubles, or and then from 11 to 1, a bunch of white guys that couldn't jump, but we could jump. We went into the gym, and it was so hot, over there, humid. And actually, I started the cruise at 228, and I came home 9 months later at 192. And the food was tremendous on the Enterprise. But the Philippines had really good facilities, And we went to the gym and played 3-on-3. Winners take, and as long as you keep winning, you keep playing. And a lot of black guys, usually the white guys weren't as good, but we were. And we could play and play and play as long as we won. And then we'd go to the pool from 1:30 to 3:30, and then back to the ship, and then to the helicopter bar in town and get a nice plate of fried rice and a San Miguel beer for about $3 American, and then go back and do it all over the next day. And so, I remember that time. I remember the first time I saw a guy get shot, and it was on leave in Olongapo City, Philippines, and right across the street, probably 40, 50 foot away, some guy tried to steal a hooker's purse. And then the Filipino cops, boom, 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 dead.
Was that another Philippine national, or was it a GI?
No, it was a Philippine.
Yeah, okay.
And their main source of revenue was, all the sins of the city that went on. They called Olongapo Sin City. And oh God, what a life. Monkey meat on a stick. And but I loved that helicopter bar because all the helicopter people went there, and you knew you weren't going to get jumped or taken advantage of, and just
So
good
it was
food and
mostly
drink.
the Navy personnel
Yeah.
that worked on the helicopters. Is that why
Yeah.
they called it the helicopter bar?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they were kind of well known. Whatever ship went into port,
Okay.
the Jolly Rotor.
Would it be one ship at a time, or could there be a couple?
There could be.
Was there ever any
no-
friction between the ships?
No.
Not like you
They-
see in the movies.
Yeah, the from playing in rock band, and I played in a group called the Seven Legends, and we traveled a 3-state area in the Midwest. And back in 1970, the newest album, Chicago Transit Authority, came out. You remember that double gray album, Chicago album, that had songs like Does Anybody Know What Time It Is, Make Me Smile,
Okay.
Color My World, and they were ahead of their time. They and Three Dog Night and Blood, Sweat and Tears especially. I loved all their music because it was more than just 3 chords. Now we played in a show band. We had 2 trumpets, a trombone, a sax player. The sax player could play the flute like Jethro Tull. And so we tackled some pretty tough music, and we became known as the band where the second set from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock, we played 1 hour non-stop Chicago. And we just had a ball. And yet I played by ear because my dad always played by ear, accordion, and he played in drums in a dance band, and I was taught how to play drums at 6 years old.
Yeah. Did you play in a band while you were in the Navy?
No,
Oh, okay.
no. And I didn't sing in choir either. I volunteered to be a youth high school Luther League director at a Lutheran church in Chula Vista, California. So I had a Lutheran church to attend, and that was a good experience. And I don't know.
Well,
I'm thankful for my life, and I know I had it kind of easy, but I contribute hopefully a lot of things to make my shipmates' lives better.
well, no, you served.
And I love my community, and I love my state of Nebraska. I am glad I came back, although God, if I would have bought a house out there, I probably could have made $300,000.
It would have made a lot more than that.
But at least our real estate prices are pretty good shape these days.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm going to end it. Thank you.